Welcome back, Monster Rangers, to another edition of the Steam Crow Show. This week for RangerCraft Stitching, we are working on Lesson 6. Can you believe it? 6! This is great! And it's all about healing. Let's get to it.
Steam Crow Show! Steam Crow Show! Steam Crow Show!
Alright, Rangers, let's get to this stitching episode. Today we are stitching 2 new stitches for our Patron Herb, and here is your design that you will be transferring to your cloth of your choice. The 2 new stitches we're learning today is the cable chain stitch and the heavy chain stitch. All the other stitches that we're using in this lesson today you have already done, but I gave you a little bit of a reminder, such as the Bullion Stitch, which we will be using for the aloe plant, the long and short stitch, which we will be using also for the aloe, and the leaf stitch for the cornflower. So our root for our spell glyph today is the cornflower, which is the patron of all herbalists. This little flower has such potential and such an amazing ability to heal and to provide us herbalists with a whole bunch of stuff. So this is the root. This is going to give your spell all the energy that you need. And for the marrow, I chose aloe. Now, I grew up as a kid with an aloe plant, and I absolutely loved breaking it off and finding that ooey gooey center and using it for sunburns and for stinging nettles, because I grew up in the Pacific Northwest and we were always getting into the stinging nettles, and it seemed to help relief that, and the fern plant helped a lot with that too. But let's take a look at a finished version of this, because you're not going to do very much of a border this time. This time I made a little bit bigger of a design. It goes out beyond our hex, and our flower actually, our marrow actually becomes part of the border. So let's take a look. As usual, my practice one is on black. So I'll put this out like this. Let me spread this out a little bit more. This is my practice fabric. As you can see, I have all my other previous stitches on it. So let's take a look at our project for today. This is our cornflower and our border. Now our border is of course tone on tone. You're not going to see, you can see it there, so it's better. I thought it would be good for me to give you a border that looks like a chain, since Krampusnacht is coming up, and any of you who are designing some Krampusnacht stitches, it'd be good to have a chain stitch. So we're gonna stitch some chain today. We use the Bullion Stitch over here for the aloe flowers, which are these beautiful orange. We're going to layer our thread today too, so we're going to do some short and long stitches on the aloe leaves, and then layer white. I'm actually using a cream, and we're going to layer that over the top of it. We did the leaf stitch here on our leaf for the cornflower. We're doing satin stitch for the cornflower itself. I gave it a little crown with some silver thread. And we're doing the heavy chain stitch. So this stitch right here for the stem and this stitch for the 2 sides of the border are going to be brand new for you today. All right, let's go ahead and get to work. I've already transferred my art onto a white dish towel. This is a flour sack dish towel that I'm sewing on today, and I get to use, I'm using a slightly larger hoop. It isn't quite as big, but I wanted a hoop that was a little bit tighter. I used a 9-inch hoop on my practice, and I found that it got a little loose too fast for me. So I probably need to bind my hoop, and we'll talk about that at a later date. All right, but I found this vintage hoop from my grandmother that's going to work great. And then I'll move those out of the way when I need to do my tips of the yellow. So let's get started. We are going to be doing the cable chain stitch. I'm going to put a knot in the back of my thread, and I'm going to take a sip of tea. That's one thing I haven't talked to you guys about is, you know, usually when I'm stitching, I do drink tea. I tend to drink a lot of tea. Today I'm enjoying a Romanoff Earl Grey that I absolutely love. It's just a nice tea. I enjoy an Earl Grey or an English breakfast early in the morning. Okay, let's do the cable chain stitch. So let's look at our handout first. So we are making circles and little short stitches in between these circles. So it's all about kind of wrapping your thread around the needle and then inserting your needle, having it go behind the fabric and above the fabric at the same time, and then pulling it through. Once you get the rhythm, it's an easy stitch to do. All right. So I'm going to take my needle and I'm going to start over here. I'm going to go right to left. So I am going to come up right here with my thread and pull it all the way through to my knot. Again, for time purposes, I'm using a knot. Those of you who do not want knots on the back of your thread, you can go ahead and take a little a nice little back stitch and you can secure it down and then not have that bulky knot on the back. All right, so what I'm going to do now is I am going to take my thread and I'm going to move it over here to the left. All right, I'm going to hold it with my left hand and I am going to wrap it around my needle once. And the reason why I'm doing that is because that's going to start my cable stitch, or that's going to start that chain, the link, all right, that you see that's not on its side, not the straight stitch, but the actual circle. So I'm going to take my needle over here and I am going to wrap it around. Notice I went from the top to the bottom, okay? And then I'm going to insert my needle just a ways away from where I came up because I want to make a nice little stitch, and then I'm going to bring my needle up over here. I want to take a little bit bigger of a stitch. There we go. Bringing up over here and make sure that my thread is right underneath my needle. All right, so here's how it looks. It's coming out of A right here. It's wrapped around my needle, and then I've put my needle through the fabric and then brought it back up through the fabric. And notice my needle is sitting on top of my fabric. And I am just going to pull my needle through. Come on, needle. There we go. Pull my needle through. And there I have my first link. All right, so let's do that again. All right. My thread is coming out. It's in my left hand. I'm going to put my needle right below it. I'm going to wrap my needle around my thread, I'm going to wrap my thread around it once. And then I'm going to take just a short stitch. I'm going to insert my needle a short distance away. And then I'm going to come up through the fabric, just like so. Make sure that my needle is underneath my fabric. Sorry. My thread is underneath my needle. I think I need more tea. And there's my second link. Let's do it again. Needle, wrap, insert, bring the needle out, put it underneath, and then pull through. Come on. This is awkward. I apologize. I'm sewing around a rig, so it's not as nice and neat as I'd like it to be. All right, let's finish this. Needle goes underneath, wrap it around. I'm going to bring that down right on the line. Notice that I'm following the line for the in-between. Now, if you wanted to, you could go ahead and mark down with a ruler. You could mark down where you wanted to put your links and how wide. If you wanted to mark it every centimeter, every half centimeter, every 2 centimeters, depending on how big you want your stitch to be, and go from there. So you have more even stitches. If you don't mind your chain being just slightly uneven, don't worry about it. All right, now I'm getting the hang of this. Uh-oh, look, I didn't make sure that my needle was underneath, so I'm gonna just put my needle through, just like so, and there we go, just like that. I'm gonna do one more just to finish off this side. Make sure that thread goes underneath my needle. And I'm going to go like that, just like so. So there it is. When you're done with this stitch, just like with a chain stitch, all you're gonna do is bring it straight down to the back, and then you can tie it off, just like so. And then make a nice knot in the back. So I'm gonna do that really quick just so that I can get this thread out of the way. I'm feeling a little klutzy today, so I want to make sure that I have things out of the way and I am not going to create a big mess. All right, let's do that. I'm going to take my snips here, cut that off, put my needle over to the side, and let's take a look at our chain. It's a little uneven, a little wonky. I'm still getting used to sewing around this rig so that you can see what I'm doing, but it's a nice chain stitch and it's going to work well, especially for Krampus. All right, so let's learn our other stitch. Since we're doing a chain stitch, I'm just going to keep the ball rolling and we're going to work on the stem here. And the heavy chain stitch is really nice because it creates a nice dense stitch, and it can make a really nice wide stem if you want to create a nice textured stem and you don't want to take the time to fill it in with a satin stitch, because the satin stitch can get kind of wonky. This can keep its neatness really nicely. So let's go ahead and get on to that. I am using a green that is a size 8 for this stitching. I wanted a plain green for this lesson. I didn't change greens. I didn't use two kinds of greens. You are welcome to. I'm using the same green for the stem of the cornflower and the leaves of the cornflower, as well as the aloe. And I just wanted to keep it consistent. And so it's a little bit different, but it is a smaller thread. If you want to use a size 5, go right ahead. Just realize that on this stem, it's going to be kind of chunky if you do that. All right, let's go ahead and get started. Oh, let's look at our handout. So here is our heavy chain stitch. We're going to make a small straight stitch right here at A, and then we're going to bring up our needle from the back up to the front right here at B, and we're going to loop it underneath that stitch, and then we're going to go right back down at B. So we're going to come up at B and go down at B, and then we're going to do another stitch right below it at C. We're going to come up at C, take the thread through that same stitch, and then go back down at C. So let's do this. I'm going to start at the top right here of my cornflower. You can see that. Later on, I can overlap some of my cornflower stitches so that it looks like it goes right underneath. So I'm going to pull this through, and then I'm going to make that short stitch just like it said at A. So there I have a short straight stitch. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to come down just a little bit further, like right here along the line. You can see right here. I'm going to bring this up and pull all the way through, and then I'm going to take the eye of my needle and I'm going to run it underneath that stitch. Pull my stitches here. All right. Let me see what's going on in the back. Okay, we're good. All right. So I put my thread through that right underneath this stitch, the first stitch that I made. I did not go through the fabric, so it's just going right underneath that loop, that stitch. Now I'm going to go back down at B. So I'm going to go back down the same place that I came up. All right, and it makes a little loop. So it's just a small chain stitch. I'm going to repeat that step. So I am going to bring up my needle right below B. So right below that stitch that I just made on the line. I'm going to bring it up like that. And then I am going to take the back of my needle again. The eye of my needle, I'm going to put my thread through. And then I am going to go right back down at C. Right back down where I came up. So basically you're making 2 chain stitches. Now, as I'm doing this, I realize, you know what? I made that stitch really, really tiny. And that's going to be okay. We'll make it work. But I think I'm going to make this next one a little bit bigger. So let's move on. I'm going to do the same thing again. I'm going to make 2 loop stitches. So I am going to come up on the line. And then what I want to do is I want to put my needle underneath this previous stitch. So I'm going to take the back of my needle and I put it underneath those 2 previous stitches, both of them right there, so you can see that. All right, and I'm going to pull that thread through, and then I'm going to go back down where I came up. There we go. And then I am going to do the same thing again. So it's 2 stitches every time. So I bring my needle up, I go underneath that previous stitch, and then I come back down. Just like so. Let's do that one more time. All right. So you're taking both stitches through the previous stitch. So I bring it up on the line, take the back of my needle. I'm going under the 2 stitches that I just made. And I'm going to go down right through where I just came up. So see how it's starting to look like a heavy chain? At the beginning it doesn't look a lot like much, but then it's going to look really nice. So I take my needle, I'm going to bring it up just below the stitch that I just made. Take the back of my needle. Oh, sorry. Go down here, right where I came up. All right. And again, those of you who like to make sure that your stitches are perfectly even, you can go ahead and mark along the stem how far apart you want your stitches to be, if you'd like. Since you're doing a chain stitch, it's a lot like marking for this. So you have that little stitch here, and then you know how wide you want your link to look. It's the same thing. You can mark that off, or you can just eyeball it. All right. So you have a choice as you get closer to the leaf. So you're sewing along, you're making this beautiful heavy chain stitch. Once you get towards the leaf, you need to make a decision. Am I going to sew over the top of the leaf and have the stem showing over the top of the leaf, or am I going to go behind the leaf? So that I'm going to leave up to you. And so on my first one, I had this long leaf right here go behind the leaf. On this version that I'm doing now, I'm going to have the leaf go in front of it. So if I'm going to have the leaf go in front of it, I'm just going to sew my leaf right over the top of this. So you have you have a couple of options. Not only do you need to decide, is your leaf going to go in front of this stem like it's drawn, or behind the stem, which you can do, and are you going to sew all the way through and just sew over the top of the stem stitch, which is just fine. You are allowed to, you can totally do that. Or you could stop and continue. Oh, I undid my stitch. Did you see that? That happens sometimes. I didn't leave enough fabric in between. All right. Or you can leave space and just keep going with the chain stitch below here. So you would start a new chain stitch here, just like you started up here. Make a stitch so you have loops, so you can put loops through it. It's totally up to you and what you would like to do. And I just knotted my thread back here, which I know some of you avid stitchers have issues with too. Look at me unstitching all my work in front of you. All right, let's try this again. Come on. There. Goodness gracious. That's what, the fourth time that I've done this? At least the third. Okay, I think I got it now. I did. All right. There we go. All right, so what I'm going to do is I'm just going to keep stitching my stem. I'm just going to stitch all the way down, which is what I did the first time on this one. I just stitched the whole chain stitch. I like the continuity of it. I put this stitch, this leaf behind, so when I got to this part over here, I just stopped. All right, and then I picked it up over here. And then I took the little leaf and I put the little leaf in front. Now on this one, I'm going to do the opposite. So this one, I'm going to put the big leaf in front and the little leaf will go behind it. And that might be an easier decision for you. I know I'm giving you a ton of options, but that's something that you need to learn how to do, because this is a design that I created for you, but you are the one who is stitching it. So if you would like to change it up a little bit, you are more than welcome to do that. You guys are individuals and you're creative people, and I believe in your decisions. So make it the decision. You can do it exactly like I did, or you can do something slightly different. So that is up to you. But this is that heavy chain stitch. So 2 stitches and you're just going through the previous loop. And again, use the back of your needle. It'll make your life a lot easier. All right, so now what I'm going to do is I'm going to stop right here, because you don't need to watch me sew an entire stem. I think you have the idea. I'm going to knot this off. Look at how nice that line is. All right, grab a little fabric here. Make my loop. Go through twice. I'm going to take this back through. All right. And then I'm going to take my snips, cut that off, and put my needle over here. All right. So our 2 new stitches, we did our cable chain stitch over here, and you only need to do 2 sides. And then we did our heavy chain stitch for the stem here. All right, so let's go on and let's move onto this leaf stitch right here. I just want to give you a reminder of it. I could stop the video right here and say, hey, you're on your own. You guys know how to do all this stuff, so use these stitches, but I'm not going to do that. I'm going to show you a quick reminder because it's nice to have everything all together. All right, so I am going to take my thread and we are going to do the leaf stitch All right, so in our last lesson we did an open leaf stitch. This is back to that solid leaf stitch so that it's going to look nice and tight. We're going to take a tiny stitch up at A, and then we're going to start on the left side and take a stitch from B, from the outer edge of the leaf to the center of the leaf, and then come to the outer edge of the leaf on the right hand side and go to the center of the leaf. And we're going to alternate that until we have completed that stitch. And this is what it's going to look like. So you're going to see that that mark, that line that goes down the center of it right there. All right, so I've started right at the tip. And again, I am using the same thread, and it is size 8. So it is a small thread, which means it's going to take you a lot more stitches to fill up this leaf. If you want to use a size 5 so that you go a little faster, use a size 5. Same goes for the aloe, but this was the color that I had, and I didn't have this color in a size 5, so I just went with my size 8. And yes, it may take me a little bit longer, but you know what? I will live. All right, so I make my little stitch here. So you can see that. I'm going to come up on the left, on the outer edge of the stitch. And again, I'm going to stab. All right, and then I'm going to go right below, right at the center line, right below the first stitch that we made, just like so. It's going to start that nice V. Now I'm going to do the same thing on the right hand side, and then I'm going to go right below the stitch that I just made. So there is my tip. My tip is getting started really nicely. All right, so now what I'm going to do is I'm just going to follow my line. So I'm going to take my needle up on the outside edge, and my middle line disappeared a little bit, so up at the top, but we're gonna fake it. It'll be okay. I'll bring that out. Bring that down. I hope you guys are doing well and that you are enjoying your November. It's finally nice to have some cooler weather here, and I have to use my tea warmer to keep my tea warm, which is really great. It's nice to not be sweating constantly here in the desert. I know you rangers in other states have probably already seen snow, and that I'm kind of jealous of. I don't miss driving in it, but I miss the quietness of that snow. I really like it. All right, so again, you're just going from the outer edge of the leaf to the inner edge of the leaf. And again, I'm going to take this leaf and I'm going to go right over the top of my stitches as I go. My tip is a little cramped. My stitches are pretty small, and that's okay. And again, remember, I'm using that tiny stitch. All right, so that's your reminder of your leaf stitch. I'm going to follow that all the way down. Remember, coming up on the outside and then going in on the inside, coming up on the outside, going in on the center. And I just alternate it. I just follow that line, and every stitch just goes down, and you're going to get that really nice leaf stitch. Now, I want to remind you as you're doing this that you keep track of your hoop, if you're using a hoop, to make sure that it's nice and tight, because if it loosens too much, or if you pull your thread too much, you're going to get a little bit of a pucker, and you don't want to get a big pucker. I have a little bit of a pucker on my practice one because that hoop that I was sewing with was a lot bigger than I was used to, and I was sewing fast and to get it done, so I got a little sloppy. I don't want you to get a little sloppy. Don't do what I did. So I want you to make sure that you're not pulling things as tight as you need to, as tight as you think you need to. You can leave things a little bit loose, but not so loose that your stitches get, you can pull your stitches off to the side. You want them just tight enough. All right, so there's our reminder for that. Let's go ahead and start working on the aloe. And the reason why I want to work on the aloe with you is because the aloe is layered. All right, and so the first thing that I do is I sew all the leaves in green, and I'm using the short long stitch, or the long and short stitch. All right, and so I start at the tip and I just take stitches and I bring them down and I just follow the curves, and I like the way that looks, because if you look at an aloe plant, you see these little white spots that it has randomly. Sometimes they're in little rows like this. Sometimes they're more random, and it worked well with that stitch, but it also has these tiny little spikes on the outside. So what I did for those tiny little spikes is that I did a back stitch along the outside of it, and then I just took a random straight stitch off. So you can see that it's actually just following the curve, and it hints at those little spikes. When you actually look at the spikes have these nice little, they're kind of like little curved, they come out. I didn't draw all those in, and you're going to notice that in the drawing your aloe is smooth. All right, I didn't give you the little spikes because your spikes can be random. They don't have to be exactly precise. All right, there's a little bug in here. All right, I did show you how to do it over here in the instructions. It's just a back stitch with a little stitch sticking out. That's all it is. It's almost like it almost looks like the blanket stitch. I haven't taught you that stitch yet, but if you know that stitch, it's a little bit like that, but I'm not using that technique. All right, so let's go ahead and work on some aloe. I need to put a knot in my thread here. Sorry about that. Here we go. I'm going to put a knot in my thread, and then I am going to try and catch a bug. And go to the tip of my aloe, and I am going to pull the aloe all the way through to my knot, and then I am going to make a short little line. All right. Where did my needle go? There it went. All right. So I made a nice short stitch. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to take my needle and I'm going to come up right next to that stitch that I just made, and I'm going to make a slightly longer one, and I'm just on the line, the outer line of the tip of my aloe, and you guys can probably barely see actually you can see my line better in the camera than I can see in real life. That's interesting. So what I'm doing is I'm just using various stitches, various size stitches, I should say correctly, and I'm going to bring these down, and I'm just going to follow the outside, and I'm going to make some of them longer and I'm going to make some of them shorter, and it's not going to be perfectly smooth, and that's okay, because the white outline that we're going to do for the spikes is going to help even that out and make our stitches nicer. So I am going to come up here, and I'm filling these in pretty tightly, but not too tightly. Like if I miss a little section, I'm not going to stress out about it too much, because I can go back in with the cream colored thread that we're using, and I can fill that spot in with a white spot. So if I have any gaps, that white thread will go ahead and make a nice little spot, but I'm getting too much of a gap here. And of course I'm using that thread because I liked the color, and I'm using a tiny size 8 thread, but that's okay. It just takes me a few more stitches to get to it than regular. All right. So we're going to do some more stitches here. And if you accidentally come up through another stitch, don't worry about it. You are okay. Because what we're doing is we're creating a nice texture for the aloe plant. I need to get enough on here so that you guys can see what I want to do for the outside. And we're getting there. All right, so you can see that texture starting to work. I know my flour sack dish towel has quite a bit of texture on it already. I'm gonna start swinging this way. There we go. And it's about you just making decisions as to where you want that thread to go. Oh, and as you're sewing, if you're sewing, make sure that that your extra fabric is pulled away and that you're not sewing through it. Because all of a sudden, if you don't pay attention, you might accidentally bring your needle through some of that extra fabric off to the side, which means you have to undo a bunch of your work. And you don't want to undo all this work, especially if you're using size 8 thread like I am. All right. I think I'm going to go back up here and I'm going to add another stitch. That's the great thing about this too, is that you can just go back up and add stitches where you feel like you need to. And I know this is probably not the most exciting thing to watch right now, but it's a good thing to watch so that you can see that we're creating a texture. We're not really worried about too much tightness here. There we go. Oh, I pulled that apart, so I'm going to go back up in here. I'm going to fill that in. There we go. Come on the outside. Make a nice long stitch. Let me do like 3 more stitches, and then we will move on to the cream color so that you can see how I did the outside. But what I did, I want to remind you, is that I did all of the green. Sometimes when I start a project, I tend to start by thread color. And if I have a lot of one color, I may just sew all of that and get it done, depending on what is overlapping what. I like things that overlap. I tend not to sew around things. I like to sew over things and give them dimension. And I had a wonky stitch, and I'm covering up that wonky stitch. And I think I've sewn enough. Oh, let's just use up my thread here. There we go. All right. I am going to knot this on the back really quick. There we go. Knot this, and then we're going to put that needle off to the side. Let's turn this over so that you can see what I did. So right now I have this texture All right, so this nice random size stitch of texture, and I'm just going to bring that down, and I'm going to follow the lines in my aloe, because aloe has this overlapping here, and you can see it right here. You want to keep your stitches following those. So this one goes here, this one goes here. And so what I did was, once I got to this line right here, I stopped and then I started stitching in a different direction. All right, I didn't finish this leaf all the way down and then put fabric, sewed more over the top. The only places that I'm sewing over the top on is this cream colored fabric that I used for the spikes and the spots. That's where I'm sewing over the top of things. All right, so let's go ahead, and I'm going to show you how to do some of this edging so that you understand what it is that you need to do. All right, so again, this color is it's a creamy color, and it is a size 8. It's not my normal DMC. It's called Pearl Iris, and I get it in a big, like a ball, rather than a normal skein. So I'm gonna pull that off. Sorry, it got caught up in my mess of a pin cushion. All right, so when normally you would have all of this done, and so I would start down here at the roots, and I would make my line for the start with the roots, and I just did a back stitch for the roots, and I totally forgot to put that in the instructions, but you just need to do back stitch for the roots, so it'll look like this. So sew your little roots right there, and then again, we're using back stitch for the outer edge. But what we're going to do is I am going to start on this, on the tip, and then we're just going to bring this down. All right. So the way I did this, sorry to bring this back again. The way I did this was I did all of the outside spikes, and I started at the back. Once this is all green, what I did was I started from the leaf that was farthest away. And the reason why I did that is because this leaf overlaps that leaf, this leaf overlaps that one, this leaf overlaps that one, and this leaf overlaps that one. So then when I sewed this one, then it overlaps, my little spikes go in the right direction. So I start back here, but I didn't start sewing there. I started sewing here. So I'm going to show you up here, but normally I start here and then work my way through each leaf. Now, really, that's just the way that's how I do things. You can start wherever you'd like. All right, so I'm going to come out at the tip, just like so. I'm going to bring this really close. And then what I'm going to do is I am going to take a stitch, a short one, and I'm going to make it right next to the green on that outer edge. So I am just going to take a small stitch. All right, so you can see where that white small stitch is right there. And then what I'm going to do is I am going to come straight out from that stitch about right there, and then I'm going to sew that spike. So it's a horizontal stitch, then a vertical stitch, let's call it, or the stitch that sticks out, the spike. So I'm going to bring it out here, and I'm going to pierce my thread. Okay, now I don't want to go into the green, I want to make sure that I'm going into the cream. So then I'm going to do that again. I'm going to go over here, I'm going to make another short stitch, and again it's going backwards. I'm going to split this stitch. So I'm overlapping because I want them to connect. I want them to make a nice little line. And then I'm going to make a spike. So I'm going to come out a little ways, just like so, and I'm going to split my stitch there, just like that. Now I know I'm sewing cream on white. All right, so this design is going to look totally different on this towel because it's on white rather than on black. But it's going to look really great. So that white isn't going to stand out as much as it does on the black. So what I do is I take a stitch and then I make a spike. Take a stitch, make a spike. Take a stitch, make a spike. And then all you have to do is, after you're done outlining all of that, is make the little white spots in your aloe. So let me go ahead and finish one more of these stitches. So I make a stitch and then I make a spike. If I make my stitch too small, I just make a second stitch and then I do a spike. So I'm not going to give you a measurement for that. You're just making small stitches. And again, it's random. They can be even if you would like them to be even, but you do not have to make them perfectly even. So again, take a stitch, make a spike. Take a stitch, make a spike. And you just follow the outline. But when you get down to here, you're going to sew over the top of all that green that you did, and it will look like this. So you see those spikes? Now notice my spikes aren't all like right through here. They're a little bit smaller. Here they're a little bit bigger. They're not all completely even, all right? But it's okay because we want that illusion of the spikes. Let's do some spots. The nice thing is that you're using the exact same thread. We're not going to worry about anything else. And what you're going to do is just come up anywhere in your green, like right here, where I have a gap. I'm going to bring it up and I'm going to bring this down and I'm going to fill in that gap with white. I'm going to make that spot. So look, I have another gap right here. I'm going to fill that in. And these spots can be various sizes. They can get bigger as they go down the leaf, towards the bigger the leaf. They can be close to each other, right next to each other. They're just random. Don't overthink it. Just put some spots in there. All right? So all you're doing is you're kind of filling in those areas with some white to give it the spots, just like so. Wow, that's going to look nice on the white, I think. That aloe's going to look really good. All right, so there's that. Let's knot this and let's look at your aloe flower and your cornflower. All right? I'm going to give you a review on that bullion stitch because that stitch is tricky and we haven't done it for a long time. All right, so we're going to go over here on these sides and we're going to do the bullion stitch. All right, and that is that caterpillar-like stitch. It gives you this great texture that you see here and it makes the flower go super fast. My key hint for you is to start at the bottom and go up to the top. So this flower, I started at the top because I was like, oh, I got to relearn bullion stitch. I haven't done it for a while, so I got to practice. So I started at the top and then I went down and then I realized, oh, I have to overlap these. So I would do the back ones and then I would overlap them and it worked out fine, but it actually, I think, looks better if you start at the bottom and go up to the top, because what you're doing is you're doing the ones behind there, or I was in the swing of things already over here and I just did a better job over here. But I like this side better than I do this side, but both work. All right, so to make this stitch easy, I use a special needle called a milliner's needle. And I didn't put it in the instructions because not everybody has one. But remember, this is a long needle and the eye of the needle is the same size as the shaft of the needle, which makes it easier to pull this stitch through. If you don't have a milliner's needle, don't fret. You can still use this. You can still use a regular needle, but what you don't want to do is hold it so tight that you can't pull that needle through. All right, so again, we're going to start at the bottom, and you can see I've been handling this, so I'm losing a little, so we're just going to make this up as we go along. I'm going to start at the outer tip. I'm going to come up at the outer tip of the flower, and then go bring my thread up at the outer tip. Then I'm going to go down at the base of the flower and then come back up. So here, outer tip. All right. And then I'm going to go down through the base, and then I'm going to come up right through the same hole that my thread came out of. All right. So if this is A and this is B, I went from A, pulled my thread all the way through, went down at B, which is the base of the petal, and then my needle came back out at A, which I then grab and wrap around as many times and pull that down as the length of this. Now, if you do a few more, it's going to curl up a little bit and give it more dimension. If you make it shorter, it'll lay a little flatter. So we're going to call this, well, I'll do one more. We're going to call this one good. So I've wrapped my thread around the same distance that's here. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to put my thumb over the top of it. All right. And then I'm going to pull my thread all the way through. Notice my thumb is still here. Pull my thread all the way through. And then I am going to bring it down. Notice it was up at the top. Now I'm bringing it back to B. All right. And then I'm going to tuck that stitch right to the back. I'm going to put it down. There we go. And there is our first bullion stitch. All right, our first nice petal. Let's do that again. All right, come out at the tip of the petal. Bring that out. Go down at the base of the petal. So I'm going to go right where it's connecting to the stem. And then you're going to come out right where you brought your thread through. So my thread is coming through there. That's where I want to bring my needle back out. And then I'm going to wrap my needle. Just like so. I'm going to put my thumb over the top of it. And it's just gentle pressure. I'm not putting a ton of pressure on it. My thread is going to go around that. There we go. And if you lift up too soon, like I just did, there are ways for you to tighten that up a little bit. There we go. And bring that down to the back. That one was a little loosey-goosey. So remember how we talk about French knots? Bullion stitch is a little bit like French knots. You do good, you do great, you do great, you do great, and then all of a sudden you have an epic failure. And that's okay. This isn't an epic failure. It still works because it's just a fatter petal. Again, I'm coming out at the tip. I'm going to go down here, and then I'm going to bring my thread through right back where my thread came out. Now there's another way to do this. You can stick your left thumb underneath it and then wrap your thread with your right hand if you're right-handed. Let's do one more. Put your thumb over the top and then pull through just like so. There we go. And you're noticing I kind of adjusting. I'm kind of turning my thread so it gets a little tighter. There we go. I'm gonna bring that down to the back, just like so. And we've got 3 petals done. It goes fairly quickly. So here we go. I stitched these ones down at the bottom, and when you go over, it's not that bad going over the top of a bullion stitch. So what I'm going to do is I basically start in between. So I'm going to come up in between here, in between 2 petals. And I'm going to bring this up here. I'm going to take my stitch, I'll leave that here. I'm going to come back up. So B, so this is where my stem is. Is that where my stem is? Yeah. And then I'm going to stick my thumb behind here, wrap my needle. I'll wrap it a few more times. All right, I'm going to pull that through. Oh, see, you get to watch me fail. So this is how I fix it. I'm just going to wrap it and pull, wrap and pull, twist, twist, pull, and then we saved our bullion. All right, and I'm going to put this right back here. Go down. There we go. So that's the beginning of it kind of overlapping, and you can make them tighter and you can overlap more. It's up to you. It does get a little bit cramped. Just be careful. If you don't feel like overlapping as much, you can just pull them out onto the side. All right. Let's end this. Again, I'm gonna knot this so that I can finish this and have a nice healing dish towel to use. All right, put my milliner's needle off to the side, and let's take a look up here at our cornflower. Now, the rest of the stitching is gonna be fairly simple. Again, I think the bullion stitch is the hardest stitch. It's just one that's really technical. This is just straight satin stitches coming out from the center, and then I overlapped black thread over the top of that. All right, and then I used the satin stitch in silver for the top of the crown. So here's how I did that. Oh, sorry, I hit the camera. All right, I am using this beautiful variegated blue for the cornflower because I wanted to have some different dimension in there, some different colors in that cornflower, because cornflower petals in the center tend to be a lot darker and almost purple, and then they've got this light blue that comes out. The orange is also variegated because I like that it has slightly lighter tones in with the richer orange too. But those are the only two variegated threads that we're using. So I'm going to actually start in the middle, and I'm just going to bring my thread out, and then I'm going to go down to the outside. So cornflowers have these like really kind of spiky petals. So I'm going to start in the middle, and you're going to notice that in the drawing I left the kind of star for the black thread. Don't worry about sewing over that because you can just stitch that black thread right over the top. So what I'm going to do is I am going to go from the outside. I started in the middle and I went to the outside because I wanted to get that knot in the middle and make that knot a little bit more secure. But now what I'm going to do is I'm going to go from the outside and into the middle. It's a little easier to pierce down through the middle and keep that consistent than coming up through the middle all at the same every single time. And all I'm going to do is I'm going to follow the outline of my cornflower. And this is going to go fairly quickly because satin stitch goes nice and quick. And this is an easy way to make your flower nice and spiky too. You could use backstitch on this if you wanted to use backstitch, but you don't have to if you wanted something a little more tighter. But you can use the satin stitch. But again, a word of caution. You don't want to pull your stitch too tight. All right? If you pull your stitch too tight, what's going to happen is you're going to start getting this puckering, and it's going to pucker that design in. Let me show you what I mean. So if you look at, let me pull this out from being folded. So in my speediness and my anxiousness, I pulled too tight when I was doing some of my stitch work here on my aloe. So if you notice, my fabric doesn't lay the design doesn't lay flat. This pops up right here. You can see that popping up. The reason why that happens is because I'm pulling too tight. So I'm pulling that fabric in different ways. I want to make sure that I try and keep my fabric as flat as possible. So I need to be mindful as I sew, especially with the satin stitch, that I'm not pulling so tight that I'm bunching up the fabric. So every once in a while, you're going to need to make sure that you adjust your hoop and that you make sure that your fabric is pretty taut and not so wiggly. All right? Meaning not so flexible where you're pushing on it and it's going, you know, it's coming a long ways. There's a lot of give. This has a little bit more give than it should, so I need to pull a little bit and pull this tighter. All right. So as I go around, I can fill in where I want, but I'm just using nice little long stitches. Little long stitches. That was great, Dawna. I'm just using long, straight satin stitches. Coming up. And that's how I'm going to sew the cornflower. All right. And that's how I'm going to do the crown here too. So I'm just going to go around, knot it off, and then I'm going to do the same thing with the black. All right. So the black just lays right over the top. Bring this back again. The black lays right over the top of the cornflower blue. All right, and you can do as many as you want in there. I originally tried it with a bullion stitch to get it to stick up some more, but it was too much. This area gets so dense, it was hard to get my needle in there. So I decided to do it this way. If I used a different stitch back here or a thinner thread, it may have worked. But today we've learned 2 new stitches. We learned the cable chain stitch and the heavy chain stitch. The rest of these stitches are stitches that you've done before. Bullion, long and short. We've done split back stitch, satin stitch, and leaf stitch. And you guys are excellent. I know that you can do this, and this is going to be great. It's a little bit more involved than normal. It's not as quick and speedy as, say, this one. It's kind of like this one where it took some time. There was some more sewing. This does take a while to do, but when you're done, I think the reward is pretty great. All right, Rangers, that concludes lesson 6 of RangerCraft stitching, our Patron Herb. I hope you enjoy stitching this project. I know it's a little more than usual, but I think you can do it, and I think you're going to really enjoy it. Plus, it's all about healing, and I just want you guys to stay healthy so that I can see you at camp, and we can drink tea and stitch together. All right, have a great Ranger Day, and I will see you again soon. Ka!